This video will provide an overview of our new Nastran read-write options in Oasys Primer 21. Nastran write-out options now have a separate panel. This can be found under the Model Write-out option for Nastran. We have a lot of new write-out options for the Nastran format in Oasys Primer 21. This includes suppressing elements for rigid paths, fixing clashing of nodal rigid bodies, translating materials with undefined Poisson's ratio, scaling beam and beam orient vectors, translating mat 169 to mat 03 by thickness. We also have few modifications to existing options like convert tight contact to RBE3, which is now turned on by default. We will go through these options in detail in upcoming slides. Users generally don't like writing DYNA rigid elements as Nastran deformable elements as they can fail to run because of reasons like distortion. Writing all nodes of DYNA rigid body to RBE2 can give very large ones. So we have two new options. One is primer star Nastran write suppress rigid elements. If this is set to true, primer will suppress elements and just write all nodes to RBE2 with conm2. The second option is primer star Nastran write element limit. This could be set to some number like say n. If n is greater than 0, primer will write only attached nodes to RBE2 for rigid bodies with more elements than n. If n is equal to 0, primer will write all external nodes to RBE2. We will now go through few more Nastran write-out reading options. We have a new option to fix clashing nodal rigid bodies. DYNA combines NRBs that share nodes, but for Nastran, RBE2s must not overlap. If this option is set, if smaller NRB is contained by a larger one, the smaller one is deleted. If multiple NRBs share same set, all are deleted except first. NRBs that share nodes are now combined into single NRB. Users now have an option to translate materials with no Poisson's ratio to mat1 with a user-defined value for Poisson's ratio. If no value is given, default value of 0.001 is used. There are now options to scale beam and beam orientation vectors. Beams are scaled to a user-defined value if this option is checked. Beam orientation vectors are similarly scaled to a user-defined value if the user checks this option on. If the beam length is 0 and the orientation vector is not set, it will automatically be created in the direction that is perpendicular to the beam axis with a unit magnitude. If MAT67 cards are present in the model and user writes out the model in Nastran format, users will now be given options to write MAT67 with stiffness values present in Nastran writeout properties panel. They can also save it as a preference or about the writing process. Primer can now read in Nastran's pload2 card. They are converted to load shell keywords inside Primer. There is a new option to translate mat 169 into mat 03 during writeout. This option has been provided to correct the stiffness of parts using mat Arup adhesive. Mat Arup adhesive can adjust the stiffness of elements using the BTHK parameter to account for adhesive being thicker in models than reality. But this stiffness correction is lost when the model is written out for Nastran. To account for that, we now move bond elements into different paths with scale stiffness depending on the thickness. For Nastran, RBE3s are created from DYNA tight contact. We now have a new preference that controls the include file for such entities. It's called primer star Nastran right contact RBE3 placement. It can take three options. D node, which will use include of element of dependent node, or I node, which will use include of element to which node ties, or CONT, which will use the include of contact. Thank you.